For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted, where this week we're talking about yet another deadly poison, one you might just interact with every day, cyanide. This episode is a bit different from the others since we won't be focused on just one plant, but to make up for that, we're also releasing a few episodes from our archives that we have lovingly remastered and added some true crime cases into. Before we get started, you know what time it is. It's your weekly disclaimer. I am not a medical expert, lifestyle guru, financial planner, or really anyone you need to take advice from. I'm just a lady who loves plants, looking to entertain you. Any and all changes you want to make to your own lifestyle and care routine should be run past your own care team. Also, poisoning people is bad and you should never do it. Thanks. With that out of the way, what even is cyanide? Cyanide is an organic compound that is most commonly bonded with hydrogen, sodium, or potassium. In plants, cyanide usually bonds with sugar, forming cyanogenic glycosides, which in nature would typically have evolved to stop beasties from feasting on them, and has resulted in some animals developing much higher tolerances for cyanide. But not humans. The most common plant sources of cyanide are cassava, pitted fruits, apples, certain kinds of bamboo, almonds, and flax seeds. The good news for us is that most of the plants I listed, minus cassava, contain smaller amounts of cyanide, and in the case of fruit pits and seeds, cyanide is only released if the pits are chewed. And they don't usually contain huge amounts of cyanide, so while you shouldn't make a habit of eating them, swallowing one wouldn't hurt you. As far as symptoms go, the Center of Disease Control says that you should look out for headaches, dizziness, vomiting, irregular heart rate, seizures, low heart rate, low blood pressure, and cardiac arrest. While it isn't super common to see these symptoms appear from plants, cyanide poisoning does still happen, and it can be really tricky for doctors to diagnose because, as you likely noticed, those symptoms are super common. One of the most common causes of cyanide poisoning today is actually house fires, and cyanide is actually commonly used in manufacturing things like plastics and certain textiles, which, when set on fire, releases those dreadful psychogenic compounds into the air where they are then inhaled. Once cyanide enters the body, it gets to work pretty quickly, with large doses of the stuff causing death in a matter of minutes. Essentially, once cyanide enters your body, it starts rapidly binding to ferric iron and cytosine C oxidase, which is the enzyme that allows transportation across the mitochondrial electron transport chain. When cyanide binds to ferric iron, it blocks transport, meaning that ATP, the energy our cells produce and need to sustain us, cannot travel where it needs to, leading our cells to basically run out of energy by way of asphyxiation, as our cells literally need the energy to absorb oxygen. Once our cells are deprived of oxygen, we start feeling confused, tired, and a little crampy. Eventually, our body will try to switch over to anaerobic functioning, but this leads to a buildup of lactate, think lactic acid, not milk, which can make our body more acidic and will eventually lead to organ failure. The severity of the poisoning ultimately depends on how much was absorbed and how quickly it's caught and treated. The good news here is that unlike the last two poisons we covered, there are actually some things that can be done for cyanide poisoning. While it is tricky to diagnose, once cyanide poisoning is suspected, patients are given thiosulfate, which does already occur in our bodies, but not at the levels needed for this job. From there, thiosulfate binds with cyanide to form thiocyanate, and then pulls it out of our body where we eventually pee it out. Another slightly more common treatment is to administer hydroxycobalamin, which chelates with cyanide to make cyanocobalamin. This treatment is preferred in more intense cases as it has fewer side effects and because in very severe instances, thiosulfate might not be able to bind with enough cyanide to make a meaningful difference. The very good news here is that in most instances, cyanide poisoning is something folks make a full recovery from, or have very minimal complications if it's caught and treated quickly enough. It's also thankfully not as common these days, with chemical processes being more regulated and advancements in medicine helping interventions to be more effective. That being said, one of the most recent cases of mass cyanide poisoning actually occurred in Uganda in 2017. Doctors and authorities knew something must be wrong when about 30 people, all of vastly different ages, reported feeling very sick and had a matching set of symptoms: vomiting and dizziness. It was discovered that these people had all attended a funeral, where one of the main dishes was prepared with cassava flour. With the authorities looped in, police began digging to figure out what might have happened. Those who attended the funeral did note that the dish was pure white and tasted a bit more bitter than normal, which was the first clue that perhaps wild or bitter cassava had been used in the flour, as opposed to a cultivated sweet variety that has been bred to have significantly less cyanide in it. When they went to the church, police found a bag of flour used and tracked down the manufacturer to pull it off the shelves. In total, about 98 people were affected by the flour. When talking with the manufacturer, they revealed that they actually had a few sources for cassava, but they had gone with a newer provider from a few towns over who offered them a much better price. It turned out that this was in fact wild cassava, and when tested it had significantly higher cyanide levels, which meant that the standard leaching, which is cutting, soaking for up to 36 hours, and then drying, had not been long enough to get the cyanide levels to a place where they were safe for human consumption. This led to a large campaign in Uganda to remind people of the importance of leaching their cassava and knowing where it was sourced. Cassava is a staple crop in Uganda, and it's not uncommon for folks to try growing the wild cultivars themselves or to forage for it. But without knowing that wild cassava has a higher cyanide content, many were left underprepared and unknowingly put their health and the health of others at risk. Before we move into the true crime part of this episode, I did want to issue a bit of a trigger warning. Cyanide, while it has been used in individual cases, is most commonly deployed in mass murders like the Holocaust, where it was used in Zyklon B, and in Jonestown, which is what we'll be discussing today. If that feels a bit too heavy for you, please feel free to stop here, and I'll see you Friday for the bonus episode. For those of you still with us, we'll be diving into the Jonestown Massacre and what led the followers of Jim Jones to commit mass suicide by way of cyanide-laced Flavor Aid. To fully understand how we got to a place where "don't drink the Kool-Aid" is a common turn of phrase, let's go back to where it all began, Indianapolis in the 1950s. Jim Jones is a fresh-faced, bright, cheery young man who just finished school and is looking to do some good in the world. Before long, he decides that entering the ministry is going to be the best way to really help people. After all, he's charismatic, successful, and he knows all kinds of other folks would be too if they loved God the way he did, and if they knew the God that he knew. By the early 1960s, Jones had amassed a pretty notable following, practicing what would later be dubbed apostolic socialism. What made him so powerful at the time was his willingness to speak about segregation, as well as the way he was so willing to incorporate other elements and pieces from different spiritual practices into his own teaching. Where other Christian churches in the region were preaching a very traditional, white-focused Christianity, Jones was making room for everyone, which was an extremely powerful thing. As you might imagine, when it was good, it was really good. But his followers would quickly see that Jones, as he got more successful, also got more greedy, more violent, and more paranoid. By the mid-1960s, Jones moved his religion to California, where he would face less scrutiny and negativity from the conservative institutions in Indiana. If you're wondering how he could afford the move, the answer lies in Jones's sort of corrupted view of socialism, where instead of funds being allocated to the true needs of his church and followers, they were being allocated entirely by Jones for what he wanted. And by all accounts, he was kind of just using his followers' assets as his own. Now, people weren't thrilled with this, but at this point in time, Jim had also been using various tactics to keep his followers compliant. Of course, the move to California helped to sever their ties to the outside world, but Jones would also often discuss those who didn't choose to stay, making it clear that if you left the group or went against him in any way, you would be exiled. He also made very elaborate threats, going so far as to force his followers to write statements saying they intended to kill the president, which he would threaten to send to authorities if they ever went against him. On top of that, Jones has started becoming increasingly violent and created a very scary and confusing narrative for his followers, telling them about an impending race war, stockpiling weapons, and sharing his psychic visions with them. Of course, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Jones would also often heal people, and as an excellent showman, his followers truly believed Jones was not just powerful, but directly connected to God. Surely he would bring them to salvation, even if the road was paved with way more hardships than they were ready for. By the 1970s, Jones was once again feeling antsy, and he wasn't loving the fact that some defectors and concerned family members had reached out to the FBI. Deciding that he wanted to be truly free, he decided that the church would move to a rural plot of land in Guyana, where they would farm and live off-grid, spending their days living in harmony with the earth. At this time, Jones was absolutely still stockpiling weapons, and people were growing increasingly concerned as Jones started to sound more and more like a bizarre combination of Manson and the Moonies. As the settlement developed, it became increasingly clear that the government in Guyana didn't really want anything to do with them. And, in fairness, it was kind of a not my circus, not my monkeys situation for them, as most of the followers were American citizens, living on a plot of land well outside any notable city. And honestly, the people of Jonestown were mostly friendly to outsiders, so they really had no reason to intervene. While the people in Jonestown were promised a utopia, they arrived to absolutely rough conditions. On top of that, they had very limited and controlled access to any kind of media. They had their own closed-circuit TV, meaning that they could only view the content Jones created and approved. And the man himself was getting more paranoid and violent by the day. The allegations of abuse are pretty substantial, but include things like physical and emotional abuse, kidnapping, and extortion. After enough defectors went to the FBI and mentioned some pretty troubling things, notably that Jones was forcing them all to promise to kill people if he died, and asking them to run drills to prepare for a potential mass suicide to quote-unquote protect the group, they did eventually send an interviewer to see what the heck was going on out there. By all accounts, the interview itself actually went pretty well. The interviewer maybe thought it wasn't a choice he would have made, but by all accounts, it seemed like a pleasant visit, and no one interviewed had any reason to suspect the piece would be negative. However, as the journalist and his team boarded their plane to fly home, Jones ordered an attack, killing them all before they could leave. After this attack, Jones told his congregation that they were no longer safe, and that they needed to choose their own fate and make the ultimate commitment to refusing capitalism. In an absolutely horrific turn of events, he had large containers of grape flavor aid laced with cyanide and sleeping agents prepared, and instructed his followers to drink it before it was too late and the violence escalated. In case you thought there would be tons of people on the fence, it seems like there were, but Jones anticipated this, and he made sure that all small children were given the drink first, followed by their parents, and then his closest inner circle. Jones himself did not drink the flavor aid, instead being found dead with a gunshot wound. Overall, this was an absolutely devastating tragedy, with a total of 918 deaths, including Jones's followers and the reporting team. Those who defected before drinking the concoction struggled with guilt, nightmares, and the FBI actually kept a pretty close eye on them afterwards to make sure they didn't end up in another cult. They were especially worried because the timing of this was close to when Manson was meant to have a parole hearing, and they had already seen from the Moonies that often the true scars left on survivors didn't start surfacing until a year or two after their defection. After this, the entire church, including the 3 satellite groups that remained in California, disbanded. Obviously, this was an absolutely horrible tragedy, but it informed a lot of what we know today in terms of what to look out for in cults and how to better offer support for those who manage to leave them. That's all I've got for this one, but I'll be back Friday to cover the plant that basically started this podcast, belladonna. See you then. If you're still here, thank you so much for listening. If you liked the show, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also follow us on social media at rooted.pod. We're on Instagram and TikTok. We're also on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, and so much more. Thank you so much for being here and learning with me. This show would not be possible without your support. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. Rooted, a Plant Podcast is a Henbane Media LLC production. It's written and produced by me, M. Grebner Gaddis, with theme music by Eric Cluxon.